My sermon today is entitled, A Heaven-Tearing, Curtain-Ripping Kind of God. It's a bit of a novel message. It kind of pushes the envelope on creativity a bit. So being a trial lawyer for 10 years before I went to seminary, I feel compelled to offer a disclaimer before I give this sermon. This sermon in no way is intended to imply that God takes sides or prefers any one person or zodiac sign over another. God cannot be labeled or defined, nor can God be understood in any simple human terms. Madison Avenue Baptist Church takes no responsibility for the theology offered from this pulpit and denies any accountability for the unpredictable nature of the sermons generated by the present minister. So you've been warned. That said, my God is a Leo. Now, as a complete coincidence, I too happen to be born under the sign of Leo, but that has nothing to do with the true nature of God. God is a Leo, a fiery, take no prisoners kind of God, a demanding to be at the center of attention kind of God, a loyal God, a God that will drop everything to come running just to be at our side. My God is not some lame Scorpio God that sits in the background being obstinate and secretive. Ooh. My God is not some moody, over-emotional, clingy Cancer sign. My God is not some pessimistic, fatalistic, miserly Capricorn. My God is a Leo, a fiery, impatient, demanding, but loyal, ready to jump to our aid at any time kind of God. Now, for those doubters out there, those other signs that are feeling left out, I have two words for you. Read Mark. The Gospel of Mark is a Leo kind of gospel. It is a fast-paced story with an urgency to the message. In Mark, there's no birth story, or really any kind of preliminary chit-chat. In the first chapter, Mark goes right to Jesus' baptism, then gallops off from there to Jesus' ministry and straight to the Passion story. In fact, one of my seminary professors described Mark as, quote, a passion story with a short introduction. My Leo God comes out full force in the beginning and at the end of Mark, which is why I chose these two bookend scriptures from Jesus' baptism in the beginning and from the crucifixion at the end. So let's start with the baptism. The part I want us to focus on is in verse 10 when Jesus comes up out of the water. In Luke and Matthew's gospel, when Jesus comes up out of the water, the heavens open and God speaks. But in Mark, when Jesus comes up out of the water, the heavens are torn open. The Greek word that's used is schizo, like the word schism, meaning to split, to tear apart, to rip open. The God in the Gospel of Mark didn't just open the heavens and descend to Jesus. That God tore open the heavens to get him. I mean, that's a Leo kind of God move if I've ever seen one. Now, there's a Leo move in the beginning of Mark and another one at the end. Because in chapter 15, verse 38, Mark tells us that in the last moments of his crucifixion, Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was ripped in two from top to bottom. Now, let me say a word about this curtain. Now, this is the curtain that y'all may know this, that separated the front of the temple where people worshiped from the Holy of Holies in the back where God was to dwell. And this was actually where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. So it was a huge curtain. Some scholars estimate from biblical descriptions that it was 60 feet high and 4 inches thick. I mean, that's sort of like, I would think the curtain at like the Richard Rodgers Theater on Broadway. I mean, a big curtain. So in verse 34, Jesus cries from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? And as he breathes his last, that massive curtain is ripped from top to bottom. It's like God was ripping through every single boundary to get to his beloved Son. Mark's gospel is not a passive, sit by the sidelines kind of God. Mark portrays a God who refuses to be separated from God's beloved Son. This is a God who would move heaven and earth literally to be at Jesus' side. This is a heaven-tearing, curtain-ripping kind of God. I mean, I can't help but think of this wonderful duet that Alex and Richard are going to do by Bob Dylan. You know, there's some beautiful lyrics in it that say, don't let me drift too far. Keep me where you are, where I will always be renewed. You know, that's kind of the Leo God I know, the God that watches over us all day and all night at all times. I mean, in fact, our beautiful Bible study this week, led by Dr. Aho, is about holy tenacity. And that's what we're talking about here. Now, some of you intractable, contrary Aquarius signs may be saying, well, my loved one went through a really hard time, and I didn't see God tearing open the heavens to get to them. As much as a Leo hates to admit it, I feel your pain. I've had times like those too. We all have. But you've got to go back and reread that baptism story in Mark. Because Mark tells us Jesus was baptized by John, verse 10, and just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. Mark doesn't say Jesus and all his new best friends gathered at the river saw the heavens torn open. It says he saw it. Only he saw it. Like an onlooker at Jesus' baptism, we don't always know how God is working in other people's lives. Maybe we don't see the heavens being ripped open and God rushing to our loved one's side because it was not for us to witness. Now, for you fussy, overcritical, worrying Virgos, which of course Leos are too, for those of you who are saying, well, what about me? I'm going through a hard time. I keep looking at the heavens. I don't see God tearing through the heavens, trying to get to me, trying to help me. Well, I have two things to say about that. First, let me just share a little nuance to my original description of God. God is not only a Leo, God is a Southerner, okay? Which means God will never show up unless properly invited. Now think about that. If you're going through a hard time and you don't feel God's presence, ask yourself, have I even invited God to help? And I mean invited in a real, authentic way. Now, Dr. Aho knows this. In the South, for example, people will say things like, well, we just gonna have to get together sometime. But Southerners also know that phrase means zip. This is not about a fluffy, meaningless invitation. This is not about invitations just to be polite. So let me ask you again. If you are going through a hard time and don't feel like God is rushing to your side, have you even asked God for help? And did you mean it? You may have heard the saying, if God seems far away, who moved? Well, it ain't God. Because the second we call from a deep, true place of need, God will tear open the heavens to get to our side. And here's the other thing for those literal Sagittarius folk out there. God will tear open the heavens and come rushing to our side, but sometimes in a way we least expect. And Mark, when those heavens are torn open, one would expect like a lightning bolt or some big Hollywood moment for God to show up. But Mark tells us that the heavens ripped open and a dove descended. Not exactly what you would expect. And that's the point. I think so many times we stare at the heavens waiting for the big Hollywood moment for God to show up, when in fact, God is quietly descending right behind us. Of course, then there are also the big Hollywood moments when God just bursts in. I mean, I've felt it. I've not felt it a lot, to be honest, but I have felt it, and I bet somewhere in your life you might have felt this too. Some years back, and this, my friend from Melbourne here may remember this, I'm sure remembers this, there were some horrible, horrible fires some years back going on in Australia. And some of the fires gained such intensity that they became what's called a firestorm, a phenomena where the fires are so powerful they literally create and sustain their own wind system. Several hundred people died during those tragic fires. But there was this one image from the news I will never forget of this firefighter in the midst of one of those firestorms, tearing through the door of a house with an axe, trying to rescue the family that was inside. And I thought, yeah, that's the God I know. Friends, my message this morning is a simple one. In the firestorms of life, which we all have them, remember, there is a force that watches over us every moment. A God that will break through every door and every obstacle to get to us. A God that will move heaven and earth to be by our side. A heaven-tearing, curtain-ripping kind of God that then quietly descends like a dove and whispers to each and every one of us, "You are my beloved, in whom I am well pleased." And the people said, amen.